Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning. This is your host, Llorraine Neithardt, and you have reached Venus Unplugged. This is the place where we explore all things Venusian: beauty, values, love, heartbreak, disappointment, the dark and the light. What we're exploring now is the Women's Dionysian Initiation at the Villa of Mysteries in Pompeii by Linda First David. She was one of the first Jungians, first-generation Jungians, and this is what I'm exploring, these women around Jung, who were called the Valkyries, and their work. Because everything that everybody's talking about is, in the Jungian world and mythology and all this is based on these women's first explorations and Jung. So what I think is the most important, also I'm going to be putting this on my Pinterest board, okay, and it probably will be under Jungian Woman, because I'm going to read a few paragraphs from her book, and there's images, so because it helps for you that do not know about the Pompeii mysteries and that magnificent color of red and the colors of Pompeii, which was a city in Rome that had all these great mystery schools and was covered by a volcano and then rediscovered intact. So it's good to explore that and also to begin to understand that in a strange way, this villa of Pompeii and these mysteries was held in time and space. So we could see the way of the feminine mysteries and what they're about. Now, part of our modern day world, right, is we tend to have somewhat of an archaic level of psychological functioning. And we transfer to the universe, or the state, or the country, or our parents, or the devil, or archetypes. Or in marriage in particular, this kind of expectation that whoever we project on is going to be the good parent and will therefore not let us down. Now, that's a setup for betrayal. So when the grief comes upon the disappointment that overthrows our plans, we can feel betrayed or picked on or singled out, rather than summoned to a more sophisticated appreciation of the radical autonomy of the universe and the radical contingency of all things mortal. And that comes from Hauntings by James Hollis. So that contract that everybody feels they have, and, that concept of, why do bad things happen to good people? It's because that's the name of the game. There's a unconscious inflation when we believe, well, I'm really good, and my point of view is good, and therefore the others is not. So we're already splitting. And remember, wholeness is about the integration of opposites. Or we don't understand that it's not meant to work that way. We either haven't earned it, or we don't understand it, or we're asking for something without the pearl of great price. There is always an exchange, and it's not because we're good. Now, a betrayal is always an upgrade, and it can eventually take us to our sometimes inflated sense of goodness, and we begin to discover what is real. And I think that is part of what the mystery schools were about, that the ancient people took the responsibility to know they were not going to grow into the next stage of life unless they were initiated. unless they went through an experience, not book knowledge, not a workshop, none of those things, an experience that challenged their beliefs or brought up a strength or a wisdom that they didn't know they have, or the reverse. You think you're too cool for school, and then suddenly you realize your fear takes you over and you can't move. You're paralyzed. So it's not a good and heavenly mother and father who are going to protect us, because the loving mother and father drops us right in the middle of life, this thing called life, so we earn our way. And in earning it, we become whole, and no one can take that from us for all of eternity if it's earned. So in these schools of mysteries, right, was set up in this particular school in Pompeii. If you go online and look up Pompeii, or as I said, go on to my Pinterest boards under Llorraine Neithardt, and I think I put it under Jungian women or women in Jung or something like that. So the mystery is to enter into a place, and there's sometimes we can do this in a dream. Sometimes we come out from a dream, or a writing, or a therapy session, or a psychic reading, or something. Like, what the heck does that mean? Well, that's a good start, because you don't know what it means. So then the attitude that you need is not to just flush it down the toilet, like, I don't understand that, so therefore that's not right. But to begin to question, so what could that mean? What is that about in my life? What is being seen? Because to just be given the answer, you'll never grow. You'll think that's the ultimate truth, which is to shortchange your soul, which is far greater and more interesting than you could ever imagine, as are these journeys into life. Something happens when we're creating, or we're doing art, or we're dancing. Suddenly, hopefully, we're in the state of a mystery. We have no idea what's going to be coming out. But by struggling with it, and holding the mystery, and holding the tension of the opposites, something we never expected reveals itself. And that is ruled by Venus. She is always revealing what we don't know. So in these mystery schools, in this particular, the Dionysian mystery school, is at the center of this mystery is Dionysus, okay, who's a very intense god of ecstasy and madness, and his beloved Ariadne, who was the one who, the red thread of Ariadne, and she's the one who helped find the Minotaur in the labyrinth. So these images, which you can also read about in Linda Fraser David's book, to get more detail. So what we're concerned about right now is entering the mystery. So the mystery is to enter into an unknown aspect of ourselves, or of life itself. It is never collusion into victimhood. A victim will never enter a mystery, because that attitude is like, ain't me, man, something that happened to me. But a mature, or at least person who attempts to be mature, says, I really need to go through this experience, just without any judgment about this, because in order to understand and to see, what do I need to know? So to enter the mystery, it's a choice to show up for your own life. And it's a conscious right towards maturity, earning a stage of life. So in these particular mysteries of Pompeii, at first it was thought that this was about a marriage, because Dionysus and Ariadne was at the center of it, and there was a veil and all this stuff. But what Linda David talks about is no. This is a rite for the mature person, the matrons, the ones who've been married, had their children, and it's a mystery into death, which God knows we need, rather than just being death-phobic and afraid. They began to prepare for this rite of passage, and not this fear, as if good people shouldn't get ill. Death isn't the illness. Death is the threshold into another place. All right. So in the mysteries, it's usually fourfold. Okay. There's the contest. There is the pathos, or what they call a defeat, and then there is the lamentation. So there's the suffering. Oh my God, why did I do this? And then there is the divinity. It's a kind of a solution or a redemption. And consciousness is ever engaged in this contest with unconsciousness, and we suffer frequent defeats at the hands of its forces. Awareness of these defeats is crucial. And that's what happens during a mystery or a rite of passage. Or we can even see it in astrology. Very often, Saturn will bring us a very long rite of passage, a problem we just can't seem to get a hold on. Instead of saying, wow, actually, I am simultaneously living my life and in a state of a mystery school. And we won't have the answer. We won't have the solution until we recognize that this is a state of mystery, that the divine is not a good parent nor a bad parent. It's not a parent at all. It's a huge and colossal and universal, unspeakable set of laws, and so we can't even imagine it. But we need to have the right attitude towards it. Not being a victim, but entering and saying, I resist this stage of maturity. I don't want to ask myself the question. It's a very simple question. Where do you need to grow up? Everybody knows. So what was set up in the ancient world, because it was a very different world, because they were more collective, they stayed together in big families and in tribes, where we are much more individual. In some way, that's a disadvantage. We're so individual, we are forgetting that it is one big, huge cosmos. And we are teeny, tiny people of great worth, but not necessarily knowledge, meaning experience. So in order to understand mystery, it's as if the way to approach this, one needs something very much like a musical ear. This is a kind of inner sensitivity, and it is indeed more important than any set of definitions could be. So there's an etiquette to approaching. Same way with our dream world. First, we have to write it down. And even if we don't understand it, that's okay. It's in a place that we can return to. It's like a poem. And we can look at it again and again and make associations and work with the dream. And every night we enter a mystery. Your mystery belongs to you. Your soul is creating the dreams and telling you the story of yourself. And in the ancient world, we knew that this was the greatest part of becoming whole. So I'm going to read right now from what Jung and what Linda David talks about in the first scene at these. There's these rooms, these chambers, the initiation chambers. So Jung writes, the alchemist whose opus certainly represents the individuation symbolism. So what Linda David is discussing here is that the initiation mystery schools of Pompeii were actually stages towards individuation. That each one of the scenes that people looked at, these paintings, were stages of individuation and what the initiate would go through, because they knew they had to enter the stage to see their folly, or to understand. And once again, a mystery, it's something that's in the heart. It's not, if we can figure it out, it's no longer a mystery. Tolerating mystery can be very, very painful, because the ego says, but I want to know. Give me the facts. Nothing but the facts. And the heart says, oh no, this, as is love itself, a great mystery. Venus herself is the greatest mystery of all, as is loving ourselves with a kind and tender heart, and yet at the same time knowing. I hate to break the news, but we got to grow up here. I've got to put down this childish belief that, I don't know, that one will never be betrayed. So here we have, so Jung writes that the alchemist whose opus certainly represents the individuation symbolism, the alchemists themselves warn us. Rend the books, lest your hearts be rent asunder. And this despite their insistence on study. Experience, not books, is what leads to understanding. So here we read from the book. Exactly the same can be asserted the principle about all classical mystery cults. Every such cult was a mystery because of the drama. The cult was a deep secret that could not be exploited. As the Greeks also said, the mystery, that is something ineffable. Okay, the experience could not be expressed in words. Even now, not the book, but the tradition through the holy writings is the essential part of every mystery cult. With this initial statement, we come to the first scene of the fresco series in Pompeii. And it must be said in advance that, just what she's talking here, that I shall not speak about the colors of the frescoes. It does not seem probable to me that one could discover that those who practice the cult really thought about every single color. The background of the pictures is the familiar Pompeian red. The first two frescoes that were in the first two scenes will be discussed as briefly as possible. They have the character of an exposition, an effect, one as somewhat dry. Only with the third scene does the true mystery drama begin to flow, and then step by step it increases more and more in depth, significance, and intensity. The initiate is depicted in the first scene as just having set foot into the chamber. Dun, 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 dun. So it's creating the scene, the innocent scene. Well, I don't know, I just stepped in here. She stands motionless and listens to a naked boy who, with anxious expression on his face, reads from the scroll. As he does, he is guided and protected by the priestess who sits behind him. So let us turn to the first figure of the initiate. She wears the clothing of a Roman matron. A veil covers her head and back. She has supported her right hand lazily on her hip, and with the left hand lifts the drapery over her bosom. Veil made earlier, this veil made earlier interprets think of a wedding veil, but no. Of this interpretation, we can only ask, who is the bridegroom? There is none. The veil screens the initiate from the world, which lies behind her. Undoubtedly, this is an important note. We even have that in everyday life. Sometimes don't you feel there's a veil between us? Or a veil between what we're trying to understand? Sometimes it feels like cotton candy is what it feels like. So, although this is a specific mystery school, we're always in the presence of some mystery if we're paying attention. So, at the time of antiquity, life was much more collective than we can imagine. People lived entirely in these kind of little cheery hubbubs of their groups. Those of the upper class lived in large organizations of family and slaves, and the latter were indeed also partly educated people. The aristocratic Roman woman was not only a society woman, she was also responsible to be the superintendent of the often large businesses where the household goods were produced. And also, the Roman woman also had many marriages, divorced and married, so nothing new under the sun with Venus. Everything, so to speak, was done in common. For example, people also bathed in common. I do not believe that the Romans would have summoned the energy to solely for themselves alone to air themselves and scrub daily and as zealously as we do in common with ourselves today, where each have wings to pleasure the other. In this style, community life was spent. To turn aside from the group, therefore, and to conceal oneself from it, even if only for a while, surely signified a decisive change. So the collective values was, we'll all hang together in a little tribe. But for the woman who chose or was chosen, she may have had a dream or she chose to go into this mystery school, that's a big deal. It is a big deal to leave our family, the one we're born into, the one of choice, to become whole. Because we're going to break everybody's heart. We're going to break everybody's heart because you're not who they think you are, or you don't want to play that role anymore. In my life, I don't need to be good. I need to be whole. That's what's of value. Whether people think one is good or bad, that's an opinion. So here are these women, and it's set up. So obviously, if they built a whole little town to make this happen, this was common, but it still was a choice. I wonder what happened to them when they got home. Okay. It produced, indeed, a state of having been forsaken, in which the voice of the world was silent, and the initiate's own voice, too, no longer penetrated. As a matter of fact, we do not know if this step of the initiation was preceded by a time of isolation, as was the case in many old initiations. But such an isolation is typical of the beginning of the way of individuation. Modern people experience this inwardly. This is no less terrible. And it is mirrored very often in the dream, such as one Jung uses to study the individual dreamer in the symbolism of psychology and alchemy. So instead of stating, I am depressed, or depression has me, perhaps look at it as, I am being called to initiation. And what does this mystery, not just getting rid of it, but what does this mystery involve? What is the attitude that I need towards this depression? Now, usually in a state of depression, because we don't have the chambers in Pompeii, and we don't necessarily, certainly there are some people who can help initiate one's therapists or scholar psychics, if they know what they're doing, understand that this is an initiation. It's not about the end result or the end game or what are you going to get or why is this happening to me. It's really about, whoa, you are being called to the sacred. And how can we relate to that? Because it's something that's done through the heart, not the mind. So what the gesture of this initiate means is not known, because she's got her hand on her hip, and I doubt she's got an attitude. Okay. But one may perhaps note something about its symbolism. The right hand, resting on the hip, indicates non-action. Lifting the drapery over the breast, on the other hand, indicate that the heart is opened to new impressions. The whole deportment of the initiate represents a reposed collectedness. And this attitude, too, is typical of the beginning of the way of individuation, the journey towards wholeness. The initiate is concentrating on the teaching which she receives from the lips of a child. That it is a child who instructs the initiate seems especially moving when we think that motherhood of the woman of antiquity remained unconsciously enthralled to nature. Perhaps for the first time, the woman here sees the child not solely as the natural object of her nurturing instinct, but more importantly, as the suffering bearer of divine meaning. Many ideas are similar. One could also think of the visit of the 12-year-old Jesus to the temple, who forms a certain parallel to this scene. Everywhere in the world, a teaching belonged to every initiation, which consisted of the ritual, telling of the sacred myths. The Greek word mythogem means that such a telling through which the myth, as word or logos, can become alive in the heart of the listener. In respect to the myth is the theora, that is, the perception which brings about the inner knowledge which forms from the hypothesis of the religious practice. So in the Orphic cult was the myth of the horrible death and the rebirth. There was obviously in this myth, which the boy is our outer scene has to read, the anxious expression on his face doubtless results from the fact that he feels sympathy during this religious reading and at the same time fear. He is also therefore the bearer of the pious feelings that likewise belong to the beginning of the initiation, which he mediates to the initiate. I would also see that as our own inner divine child. The devil is horrified with what is happening with our life, and yet has to tell us, you better look. But the boy means still more than this. He is naked, which for the people of antiquity is a sign of the divine. And he wears these kind of high-laced boots, which are actually very much in fashion these days, and belong to the Greek theater that arose from the cult of Dionysus as an attribute to Dionysus. So just think about that image, or think about yourself, being called forth to relate in another way. A child comes and reads the story, or the story that you have about a depression or a sadness, knowing that what is really happening is you choosing to consciously look at, and in this mystery school, what you're looking for is like, where do I need to grow up? And I think certainly the mystery of relatedness somebody hits a complex or a projection, we've never grown out of it. So before we do the blame game or self-blame, just say, wait. Where do I need to grow up? How do I enlarge this? Where do I secretly have an inflation that I'm a good person and therefore good should befall me and kind of smite my enemy? Well, that splits us in half, and that doesn't work anymore, and it keeps us in a very limited relationship to Venus and this astounding cosmos of which we are very small but very worthwhile. So next week, there we have it with the mysteries, the beginning of the Dionysian initiation. So perhaps look at your issues, as they're called, as initiations and not issues. Let's see what happens. Okay, so you can go on to iTunes and download, or you can go on Pinterest, or you can go on my website. These are all these sessions, and start listening and tell your friends. Bye-bye.
Napa know-how.
The Napa guy knows not to judge a man by his car's multicolored paint job or absence of modern gadgetry. Who cares if it's technically old enough to vote and the windows are powered by the strength of your left arm? Your monthly payment is zero, and it'll stay that way. Because with over 500,000 parts and a little Napa know-how, you can keep anything on the road. She may not be pretty, but she's all yours. That's Napa know-how.
Napa know-how.
Snap 'em, zap 'em, hold 'em, trap 'em. Mice, rats, or other rodents causing you grief? Get rid of them. Victor has the broadest, most innovative line of rodent and insect control products on the market. From our iconic snap traps with the big red Victor V to new products like Victor Holdfast, your mouse, rat, and insect problems are a thing of the past. There's a reason people have trusted Victor to get rid of pests for nearly 120 years. Because with Victor, it's done. Available at Walmart. Available at Walmart. Available at Walmart. Available at Walmart.